Good evening, everybody. This is another edition of the Passball Show, brought to you, of course, by Pielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. Glad to be with you again. One of the things that I wanted to state a long time ago when we started to get the show back going was I didn't want to do anything in regards to just take a bunch of time and do one continuous broadcast, because over that time, you understand that very few people are going to look at it and kind of give you the attention the topics you're discussing deserve. So on a day like today where I had multiple things that I wanted to bring up, multiple things that I was interested in talking about, we decided to split it up. We did a show this morning, very early this morning, and we spoke about some different topics going on in the world of baseball. Barry Bonds getting his 756th home run on this day in baseball history, amongst other things. Show will be available if anybody's looking to listen to or a recap of what I spoke about this morning. Now, today, or at least in this part of the show, we're going to do a little tribute. We're going to talk about a man who really was a great part of National Hockey League history, one of the greats of the 60s and the early part of the 1970s. Stan Mikita, passing away today at the age of 78. We're going to get involved with some other stuff. We're going to talk about some baseball topics. There's a couple different things that were kind of interesting me in a way. And I wanted to kind of get a couple things off my chest. We got the, talk a little bit about Kevin Kiermaier. We can talk about Robinson Cano. Those are all things we're going to bring up. Comment feeds are available both on Facebook Live and Periscope. So anything that's on your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America, please bring up. But I did want to talk a little bit about Stan Mikita, not just a guy who obviously spent his entire career with the Chicago Blackhawks, was a man who was part of their 1960-1961 Stanley Cup. Third in their history, and what ended up becoming their first in 49 years, before they ended up winning in 2009-2010. So you look at the Chicago Blackhawks, a team that up until 1986 was known as the Black Hawks, in other words, two words, not just Black Hawks, one word, Black Hawks, two words. And you'd be surprised how many people don't know that. But obviously a pretty similar uniform for an extremely long time. Founded as one of the original 6 teams in the National Hockey League, 6-time Stanley Cup Champion, 3 times in the past decade. And you look at it, very few players you look at and you say are, pretty much a definitive example of what the National Hockey League is. And Stan Mikita was one of those players. And a guy who, believe it or not, actually started his career as a tough guy. And a lot of guys did. A lot of players, took pride in that macho type of mentality that hockey players had. And, went overboard to try to prove it. And Mikita was not he wasn't an exception, at least through the first part of his career. And the story goes that apparently one of his daughters said something, "Why do you spend so much time sitting down?" Basically referring to the amount of time that Mikita spent in the penalty box. And he decided that he was going to change. He decided that it was time for him to become more of a clean hockey player. And he ended up winning what was called the Sportsman Award, one of the trophies that was presented year in and year out, I believe 4 times if I'm not mistaken. So here's a guy that ended up becoming one of the nice guys, but also one of the more innovative players. They give him a lot of people give him credit for the use of the curved stick. Him and Bobby Hall were well known for kind of gaining a little traction in the NHL for the use of a curved stick, which obviously gave hockey players a little bit more of a control of the stick as they're taking a shot, led to a little better goal scoring. And of course, as time goes by and everybody's using the curved stick, the NHL sets up guidelines of exactly how much a stick should be curved. But really, without Mikita and Bobby Hull, those ideas probably don't go out there. So you're looking at things that revolutionized the sport. And he certainly was a revolutionary play. And a guy, obviously, without a doubt, was a Hall of Famer, was brought in there pretty much as quick as he could possibly be. And he put up solid numbers for the better part of 4 decades. Played in the NHL in 1950, the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. One of few, and of course, if you think of Gordie Howe, he's a guy that played forever. But Stan Mikita is on a very small list of NHL players that his career spanned 4 decades. Like I said, the 1960-1961 Stanley Cup Champion with the Chicago Blackhawks, certainly one of the best players that they ever had in their history. So obviously, rest in peace to a hockey legend and a hockey icon. Stan Mikita's impact on the world of sports and certainly the world of hockey will be missed. While we're a little down right now, I did want to mention that word has come out that former Boston Red Sox infielder and longtime broadcaster Jerry Remy has found out that his cancer has come back. And he battled cancer a couple of years ago, was obviously in and out of treatment. Obviously, we wish him the best. And once again, every time a cancer story comes back, whether it's a reoccurrence of a cancer, whether it's somebody being diagnosed with it, it's hard to explain how that's something that kind of stays with you and never seems to go away. And obviously, we wish Jerry Remy the best. From what I hear, one of the nicer guys around the sport, a very good broadcaster for many years with the Boston Red Sox, and obviously played with the California Angels and the Boston Red Sox in the 1970s and 1980s. His career ended a little bit short, and very well could have been an impactful player on the mid-80s Red Sox, particularly the 1986 team, but his career, ended pretty early, and he went right into the broadcast booth, and that's pretty much where he's been for the last series of years. He's done a very good job for the Boston Red Sox, and obviously a lot of fans down in Boston, want the best out of him. And listen, if you're a baseball fan, you want to see a guy like Jerry Remy pull through. So obviously we'll keep the prayers going. Hopefully things work out for Jerry Remy. Obviously the best to him and his family during this very tough time, and the best to his upcoming treatment. As we move into baseball topics today, one of the things that kind of came to my mind today, and I didn't want to bring it up on the morning show because I felt like I had about 4 or 5 diverse topics that I wanted to spend some time on. So I didn't want to mention a couple minutes here and just kind of jump around a little bit. I wanted to wait until I had a couple more minutes to talk about it, and a couple more minutes to talk about my points and how I feel about this particular player. Now, it's 2018 now, in the year of 2015. I had a very spirited debate with a lot of baseball people. The discussion was about a player that I believed was the most overrated in all of Major League Baseball at the time. And that player is center fielder Kevin Kiermaier of the Tampa Bay Rays. Now, there's no way or no reason that anyone could dispute the man's skills and the man's ability. He's a hell of a defensive player. He's probably the best center fielder in the game. You can put Kevin Pielli of the Toronto Blue Jays up in the discussion. But you can talk about Kevin Kiermaier's defense all you want. He's a very, very good defensive player. My dispute goes back to the argument or the discussion that we had in 2015, where we're talking about Kevin Kiermaier being one of the best players in the entire American League. And I thought that was a little bit of a stretch. I understood that we were factoring in defense. And this was around the time, if you do remember, 2015, it was kind of a jump in the use of analytics in baseball. It wasn't the beginning of it. We knew that defensive metrics were around the game for a couple of years, but had hit a certain time frame where they were being relied upon a lot more. And my argument with this was more about the fact that defense, as important as it is, was being overrated in that point in time. We're looking at defense in 2015, and I think we've actually taken a positive step over the last couple of years and kind of quantifying defense for what it really is, its value in baseball, the fact that you do need players that can make a good play, can play better defense, and in some cases shave a couple runs off the board, and maybe determine a win or two over the course of the season. But my discussion with this was strictly upon the American League Most Valuable Player vote. And that was something that frustrated me. It's something that I needed to get off my chest then, and it's something that I feel the need to kind of verify right now, as we're looking at a player, Kevin Kiermaier, who has battled some injuries this year, but in year number 2 of signing a very long-term contract with the Tampa Bay Rays, one in which many felt was a guaranteed good deal for both the Rays and the player, it's looking like it might just go down in history as a very good deal for the player. Now, I thought about some players that were very dominant defensive players. You think of a guy like Ozzie Smith, right? Our first ballot Hall of Famer as a shortstop. Now, without Ozzie Smith's defense, he's probably not in baseball's Hall of Fame. But Ozzie, as a top of the order type of player, a guy who stole a lot of bases, a guy who was a very tough out in a time where that was valued. A guy that would minimally strike out and put the ball in play a lot. Certainly a player with a lot of speed that's able to do that and not strike out had a tremendous value, especially somebody to play the defense that Ozzie Smith played. And if you look at his time in San Diego before he was traded to the St. Louis Cardinals after the 1981 season, you saw that this was a player that was stellar defensively and was noticed. It wasn't just a regional thing in San Diego. Major League Baseball, and baseball as much of a national, as much at the national level as it possibly could have been at that time. Remember, ESPN's in its infancy. There's no MLB network. There's no internet. So, news that usually travels right now very quickly would not travel that quickly in 1979, 1980, 1981. But word was getting around that this Ozzie Smith guy could play the position of shortstop. So he improves himself offensively, becomes an okay offensive player. Has about 5 straight years from, 80, I think it was like 85 to 89, where he hits over 270. The very good season in 1987, where he hits 182 hits. And through consistency of being a 13-time Gold Glover, a 15-time All-Star, established himself as one of the best defensive players to ever play the game. Now, the fact that he played shortstop, sure, there's a little bit of bias towards middle infielders when it comes to their defense. They're given a little more credit as defenders than somebody that may play, let's say, first base or right field. Now, there's a premium on third base. I think there's a premium up to a certain point in center field. But looking at all these different positions individually, I think it's a lot harder to be one of the best players in all Major League Baseball as a center fielder if your prime, specialty is playing defense. And it's not to take away anything from what Kevin Kiermaier has done defensively. He's been a tremendous defensive player for a while, and in fact, the fact that he's hitting 189 right now, shows wonders because his wins above replacement is over 1. A 189 hitter with a .6 wins above replacement is obviously a testament to how good his defense still is. We're talking about 4 years later after that breakout season of 2015. But I'm going back to that discussion because it just made me think. And I'm trying to say a player that is dominant defensively could be that close to being the most valuable player. Ozzie Smith in 1987, pretty close to being the most valuable player. So how good would you have to be defensively to be into the MVP discussion? And I think that's a similar topic to when we talk about when we see a pitcher, let's say like Justin Verlander, who was the last pitcher to win the most valuable player. And obviously you look at relievers like Dennis Eckersley and Bruce Sutter and others who have won the most valuable player award. Roger Clemens winning the most valuable player award. So you would figure that that pitcher, if he was going to have a good chance of winning the most valuable player, which generally goes to the best hitter, or the most prolific offensive player, that pitcher would have to stand out ridiculously. That pitcher would have to go 24-5 like Justin Verlander did in a year that you won the Cy Young. So I would think the same thing would apply to a player that was very specific in their attributes being on the defensive side of the ball. So Kevin Kiermaier, who his wins above replacement in 2015, by the way, was 7.5. And if you're going to rank him amongst all players in the American League, only Mike Trout at 9.4 and Josh Donaldson at 8.5 were better amongst wins above replacement. And that's where we kind of get deceived with this a little bit. Because, wins above replacement, what it's trying to do is trying to balance you out as the complete player and add factors in that enhance your value. The better you are as a defensive player, if you're the best defensive player in all sports, and you save your team runs, and you gain your team runs, defensive runs saved, and your range is ridiculous, that you could win games based off of this imaginary number. And those wins add up, and they're just as similar to that of what somebody could accomplish on the offensive side of the ball. Pretty similar to what a pitcher can accomplish just by dominating on the mound. So we're making all these things equal. And it's almost unfair to the defensive player, because the defensive player is probably getting more credit right now than they ever have, and perhaps they ever deserve. Because if we're looking at a guy that has a 7.5 wins above replacement after dominating from the defensive side of the ball in center field, but putting up very mediocre offensive numbers. In other words, a 263 average, 10 home runs, 40 runs batted in, a lot of strikeouts, an OPS just over 700. I can't put that player on the same level of that player that has, let's say, Lorenzo Cain in 2015, who had a 7.2 wins above replacement. He hit 307. He had an 838 OPS, 101 runs scored. Hit a bunch of doubles, bunch of home runs. More of an impact player on the bases. Pretty similar to what we're saying from a pitcher. If we want a pitcher to be in the discussion for an MVP, we want to make sure that that pitcher is, ridiculous in regards to what they're doing and almost outperforming offensive players with what they're doing on the mound. Now we got to see defense that is so stellar and so game-changing that you could put that defense over a player that's hitting 47 home runs or 40 home runs or driving in 123 runs or hitting 320 or has 180 hits, 120 runs scored. OPS is in the nines. You want that defense to be stellar, that's going to be more valuable than that player that can contribute that much offensively to a team, and likely to a team that's contending. And I know that the Rays always have the ability to stick in a race, be a couple games over 500, make a run for the wild card, and a couple rare cases, not since Kevin Cash has taken over as manager, make it to the postseason. Obviously, the run in 2008 notwithstanding. But, is a player like Kevin Kiermaier that much more valuable than a player that you would say is a top 5 or top 10 player when it comes to being the most valuable player in the league? And the answer is no. And I look at a guy, and it's unfortunate that he's having a bad season, but he's still playing good defense. The one thing I always say about players defensively is that depreciation exists. And we don't really factor in depreciation when, as it should be in baseball, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But every year a player gets older, they become less of a strong defensive player. And it happens year upon year upon year. So 5 years go by, that defensive player you may have said was so great at a certain level is a little bit less and a little bit weaker, has a little bit less range, has a little bit less, instinct and speed and ability to save runs over the course of a game. It's just like driving a new car out of a car lot. That car He's going to look pretty good for a couple of years, but year 3, year 4, year 5, it's still a good car, and in some cases might still be able to perform at a high level, but it's not going to perform at the same level it did when you drove it off the lot. And that's the same thing that applies to Kevin Kiermaier. I did want to touch a little bit about Michael Kay's comments the other day, and I'm going to preface what I'm saying by saying that, you know what, Michael Kay overall is not one of my favorite radio show hosts to listen to. I've said all along that I feel like he's a much better play-by-play guy. He's doing what he wants to do. He's got his own show. He's got airtime, so he deserves it. So I'm not going to take anything away from that. That being said, the statements I'm about to make are as a person that is not a fan of the individual. I believe in sometimes being misquoted. I believe, as a person that spends a lot of time speaking, that you could say something and fumble over 2 words and not say them in a way that you intended, and they could have very distinct meanings. The key is to identify that and apologize for that and try to move on. We live in a world where people that are listening and people that are watching want to be extremely judgmental. And they have the right to do that as the consumer. But at the same time, we understand that we're all human beings that do this. Listening back to what Michael Kay said the other day in regards to Clint Frazier and Jacoby Ellsbury, it looked to me like a fraudulent slip. It looked like one of those things that instead of saying it's a shame, we said shame on, which obviously changed the complete meaning of what was said. And he sounds sincere, and I don't believe, in the context of what he was saying, that he was intending to say something malicious. Obviously, it came out a lot worse. It almost came out, and it sounded to many like he said shame on Clint Frazier and shame on Jacoby Ellsbury for being injured and not giving themselves an opportunity to play, when he really meant to say, at least based off of the context of the discussion, that it was a shame that both of those players are not healthy right now because they get an opportunity to play every day with the Yankees right now with Aaron Judge out of the lineup. Now, that was my perception of it. And once again, I listened back to hear the context before and after, and listening to it a couple times, you realize that I don't think it was a malicious act by Michael Kay. And once again, this is coming from a person that's not going to really claim to be a Michael Kay fan. I think he's got a good home run call. I think his play-by-play for the Yankees is good. To me, I see him as a much better play-by-play guy than he is a talk show host. And for his show to be successful, he's going to have to really depend on his co-host to provide a lot of the meat and the personality as we hit the halfway point here in the basketball show. That being said, in a time where maybe I would normally be more critical of Michael Kay, I'm not going to be in this situation because I believe his statement was intended to be, it is a shame as opposed to shame on them. Because really, I think he'd have a lot more to say if his tone was malicious. If he wanted to really go after Frazier and Ellsbury, I think he would have used some more adjectives, a little more vernacular, and be a little harder on those 2 players that he mentioned there. And afterwards, it's not like he backed away from it like he didn't want the statement to sound like he did, because I believe he still thought that he said it was a shame as opposed to shame on it. So I'm going to look at this as a mistake. And, some fans are upset. If you're a Yankees fan, you don't want somebody to make comments like that. And that's if you believe that those comments were from the heart and really meant and heartfelt. And if they weren't, then I would say shame on Michael Kay. But once again, I don't believe, based off of the context of what he was saying, that he was basically telling Clint Frazier and Jacoby Ellsbury, shame on them for not being healthy. Obviously, Frazier is dealing with concussions, something where he's got dizzy spells, and it's very serious to a point where, here's a guy that, from day to day can't seem to get his head clear. And we know about concussions, how they exist in the world of sports. We know about the NFL players who have had to deal with lifelong effects of concussions from years upon years. Some of them end up having to end their own life because they feel like there's no way out. So, once again, if Michael Kay was going that route, I think he would be more prepared. He would be more prepared in regards to the angle that he's hitting Clint Frazier with, and also be more prepared for the backlash that's going to come with it. I think this was a simple mistake. And listen, when you're being paid for what comes out of your mouth in regards to your voice, there's got to come responsibility to it. So I don't have any issue with that. You want to hold them accountable, I don't think you should be fired. But you know what? If Yes wants to slip them a little fine, or maybe even some sort of suspension or slap on the wrist or whatever, if he's going to be reprimanded for that, I don't have that much of an issue. Because I think from the Yes network, you want to represent the Yankees. And I do think you want objectivity. You want the Yankees to be picked on if they deserve to be picked on. You don't want three guys on a show on ESPN radio on the Yes network basically waxing poetic about the Yankees after they lost 4 straight games to the Boston Red Sox. I don't think anybody wants to hear that either. If you're a fan of the Yankees, you probably want a little criticism after a rough weekend. So if you're Yes, I think you handle it internally. I certainly don't feel like the guy should be fired because I don't think his comments were malicious. I really don't. I think it was a slip in the speech. And, I do that from time to time, but I also have to understand that I'm 100% accountable and responsible for everything that I say. And if something bad or perceived that could be perceived as bad comes out of my mouth and is heard by a bunch of people, even if it's misinterpreted, I still have to own it. I could answer to it, I could defend it, I could explain what it was, but I also have to own the fact that those words came out of my mouth. And Michael Kay in this spot's got to do the same thing. Obviously we're not talking about anything as malicious as, let's say, Jimmy the Greek said, or Al Campanis, when he made those comments on Dateline. When you make statements like that, those are harder to walk back. Those are harder to convince somebody that it was a mistake. In Michael Kay's case here, I believe it was a simple fumbling over words, maybe intended to say it's a shame on for them. He said shame on them. And obviously you understand why Clint Frazier's mad. So hopefully that's something that they can straighten out. Jacoby Ellsbury, I'm sure, will get wind of what Michael Kay said, and hopefully Kay will have a discussion with him. And I would expect over time they'll be able to straighten that out. But it kind of segues me into my next thing that I wanted to discuss, and that was the offseason that the New York Yankees had in 2013. And you say, hey, it's 2018, we're in the month of August. Why should we bring up the offseason of 2013? Well, part of that offseason came into the news today. Not just the mention of Jacoby Ellsbury by Michael Kay on his radio program, but Jacoby Ellsbury just had hip surgery. He had hip surgery, which will leave him out for the rest of this season, and likely to the start of the 2019 season. Now we look at Jacoby Ellsbury's contract. He is signed through 2020. At the beginning of the 2014 season, or the offseason of 2013, he signed a deal with the New York Yankees for 7 years and $153 million. That same offseason, a former Yankee, which a lot of people, and if you're an Major League Baseball fan, you know, is currently serving a suspension for the violation of MLB's Drug Treatment and Prevention Program, and that, of course, is Robinson Cano. He was a Yankee through the 2013 season, which, by the way, the Boston Red Sox just won their most recent World Series. The Yankees are trying to react. They're coming off of a season where they had 85 wins that year, a little bit of a down year, but had a solid player that was a pending free agent, and really felt that they should put themselves in a position that they should bring him back. And what the Yankees decided is they felt that Robinson Cano and his camp were a little bit greedy. They were looking for a little bit too much money. They were looking for a player to be paid as if he was something like an immortal. Albert Pujols, who was putting up immortal numbers, ended up getting a 10-year contract. Alex Rodriguez, whether you judge him off the steroids or not, still an immortal player for what he accomplished over his career, gets a 10-year contract. The Seattle Mariners come to the forefront. They're willing to offer Robinson Cano 10 years, $240 million. The Yankees decide that's too much. And listen, in a day and age that we live in, even right now, there was one of very few examples of the New York Yankees being outbid. And they played it off, basically making the statement that that was a player that was seeking too much money. And it wasn't worth it for that organization to pay that player for 10 years and $24 million a season. Now, I think it's one of those things that we can all agree on. A 10-year contract in baseball is probably getting to a point where you're going to see less and less of them. I'd like to say obsolete, but there's still players like Cano, like Albert Pujols, like Giancarlo Stanton, and likely like a Bryce Harper and a Manny Machado, who will probably get again. So it's not like we've seen our last 10-year contract. At least my belief. We'll see how it ends up working out. But that being said, Robinson Cano ends up getting the deal that he's looking for, leaves the Yankees, and the Yankees feel they got this pool of money. With this pool of money, they can make a better baseball decision. And in their minds, the better baseball decision they make is to sign a center fielder from the Boston Red Sox, the defending World Series champions, by the name of Jacoby Ellsbury. Now, listen, to talk about Jacoby Ellsbury being a bad signing for the Yankees or a bad contract really wouldn't be speaking much of my baseball IQ. It wouldn't be. It's something that pretty much is common knowledge. I'm not breaking any ground when I say this. And if you look at Jacoby Ellsbury's stats since the day that he signed with the New York Yankees for the 2014 season, his performance has been very underwhelming. Certainly his performance this year, he's not on the field. The Yankees probably could lose him and could use him at this point. And as we talk about Michael Kay, you just heard me say the word lose instead of use. So you understand that there can be an example of an occasional fraudulent slip when one is speaking. And obviously the slip of the word, the way it comes out differently, will certainly change the meaning of what one is discussing. Back to Ellsbury. My point, and I think other people have made a similar point, was that can you ever look at Jacoby Ellsbury, even at his best, and obviously the best year that he had was that 2011 season, where he hit 321, had a 928 OPS, led the league with 364 total bases, scored 119 runs, had 212 hits, 32 home runs, 105 runs batted in, and 39 stolen bases, which, by the way, was the fourth highest in his career. So he's had much better stolen base seasons, but all these other offensive numbers were very much up in this one particular season. Now, should I say that should have drawn a little bit of a red flag? Well, if you go back to his first full season in 2008, the next season in 2009, they were good seasons, but certainly were not on the level that he was in 2011. Certainly from a home run standpoint, he was not that same type of hitter. He had 46 doubles in that year. He didn't approach it before. And if you look at his last season in Boston in 2013, and the reason I'm holding out 2010 is because he only played in 18 games due to injury. And 2012, which I'm going to talk about in a second, he only played a half a season. So Jacoby Ellsbury's last season in 2013, before he was set to hit free agency, he hit 298, had 781 OPS, which was considerably down from 2 years ago, hit 9 home runs, drove in 53 runs, led the league with 52 stolen bases, scored 92 runs, and had 172 hits. A good season, but not a great season. And I want to talk about the 2012 season for a second, because you look at 2012, he played a half the season. So what you'd assume you could probably do is look back at the numbers and kind of do the doubling factor. Times it by 2, because he played half the season. And see if his numbers were closer to what he ended up doing in 2013 or what he did in 2011 in his breakout season. So, doubling 43 runs makes 86, closer to 92 than 119. 82 hits, double that to 164, closer to 172 than 212. 18 doubles, you double it to 36, closer to 31 than 46. 5 triples he had in 2011, he had 0 in 2012. Obviously, 4 home runs, nowhere near, even if you double it, to 32. 26 runs batted in, you double that, 52 runs batted in is closer to 53 than 105. So the point being, the Yankees, who had a big decision to make, not just to whether to sign Cano or not, but how to handle what they would consider their surplus of not signing Cano. Now, I think everybody, and it's not just Yankee fans, it's not people in the Yankee media, there's a lot of people throughout national baseball that get caught up in this trap, saying any left-hand hitter, you put them in Yankee Stadium and their power numbers are going to go up. It doesn't necessarily apply to everybody. Now, Jacoby Ellsbury's second highest home run season was his first season with the Yankees in 2014. He hit 16 home runs, but you saw right off of that, which has been his best season, and a season you'd probably say would be expected to be an average over the most of Jacoby Ellsbury's healthy seasons, was certainly nowhere near the level of Robinson Cano. And I will tell you this, if you're looking at a player to say Jacoby Ellsbury at his best with the Yankees is the most comparable to, that player would be Brett Gardner. And Brett Gardner is a player that I thought when he came up was kind of a player that catered to the Yankees. In other words, if you shipped him off to some other team, and I kind of compared him a lot to Melky Cabrera, and Melky Cabrera did have some good years with other teams. Obviously, that year that he had in Kansas City, that all-star season he had with the Giants before he got popped for PEDs. But I looked at certain players and said, you know what? This player may only perform well as a Yankee and may not perform well for anybody else. But I look at Brett Gardner and I bring it up because he signed a 4-year contract after the 2014 season, a year later. He's making about $12.5 million a year. He's got an option for his contract for next season for 2019 at around $12.5 million. Now, Yankees fans can say there may not be a ridiculous amount of flair in Brett Gardner. He may not necessarily be a star, Brett Gardner. But I'll tell you, he is a pretty good, impactful player on this New York Yankees team. Now, the question I would have in regards to the offseason is, are you going to pursue another outfielder? And if you do that, then Gardner may be one of the odd men out. I would think the Yankees, because of team control, would like to hold on to an Aaron Hicks. Aaron Judge is not going anywhere. And by the way, you got this guy named Stanley. I know you could use the DH, which gives you a little bit of a benefit and the ability to play another outfielder. But those 3 players, plus Brett Gardner, plus, let's say, hypothetically, a Bryce Harper, would likely be too much. So Gardner would probably have to go as a free agent, though his buyout is only for $2 million. Jacoby Ellsbury is signed through the 2019 and 2020 season at $21.147 million. Now, once again, you could say that hindsight was the key here. You could say that hindsight is the reason that we're looking at Jacoby Ellsbury's contract and saying it's a ridiculous albatross. You could say it's an easy second guess. I don't like to use the word first guess because I don't know what the meaning of that really is. It's one of those things that you could say, hey, I said it before it ever really happened, but if you're second guessing it, it usually is before sometimes something happens, or as it's happening. It's not long in a hindsight stage where you're second guessing something. So, I look at the Ellsbury contract, and I just find it very hard to believe that the Yankees brass, who obviously gets a lot of credit for its intellect, for the depth that it has in regards to all the good minds that they put together there. And listen, everybody is entitled to a mistake. You know, I make a mistake, I stand up to it. In some cases, I'm forgiven. In some cases, I'm not. Every team, no matter how good you are in professional sports, at some point you're going to make a mistake. The Yankees, who have done a very good job over the last 3-4 years in regards to trading players, haven't seemed to make too many bad deals. Made a bad free agent signing when they decided to bring Jacoby Ellsbury in. And I think a lot of it had to do with that thought that he was going to turn into a power hitter at Yankee Stadium. And I'm looking at that, and I'm just not seeing it. This is a guy that relies on his legs. This is a guy that can play very good defense in the outfield. But if what you're looking to do is replace the bat of Robinson Cano in the lineup, I still, back in a time machine, going back to the 2013 offseason, am having a real hard time saying, in spite of all the hindsight, let's just forget about it. They can't sell me that Jacoby Ellsbury was going to replace Robinson Cano's bat in the lineup. And I know it's taken a turn for the worse. I know it's gotten a little worse over the last couple of years. I mean, for crying out loud, the guy hasn't played this year. So you understand that his value, or people's perception of the player, is going to be as low as it's ever been. And I get it. And I'm not trying to throw dirt on top of the pile here. I'm not trying to bury John C. Reilly while he's laying in a ditch in Step Brothers. But I'm having a hard time looking back on this and saying, hey, we try to use, futures, and we try to use information to say, hey, what can we predict for the future? Robinson Cano, likely, in years 8, 9, and 10 of his contract, will probably not be the same player that he was in years 1 through 7. But I would have made a pretty good bet that Robinson Cano, over the course of the first 7 years of his contract, had it been with the Yankees, or even if it's with Seattle, which is likely to be, in spite of his suspension, would have outperformed Jacoby Ellsbury at his absolute best. Not the Jacoby Ellsbury we're looking at now, but even if Jacoby Ellsbury had made a couple All-Star appearances, maybe won a Gold Glove or two, maybe led the league in stolen bases. Robinson Cano was more of a dynamic player, but also more of a healthy player, a player that didn't have a track record for injuries. Year in and year out, we're playing 150 or more games. In fact, the only year that he's taken a little bit of a hit is this season because of the suspension. So you could say, and a lot of people did at the time, well, screw you, Robinson Cano. You left the Yankees, you're going to play for a losing baseball team. But it's not like the Yankees have won a World Series since Robinson Cano was left. Cano was part of the 2019, and in my opinion, he was one of the generational players that they really needed to keep as part of the New York Yankees when they were switching from the Jeter team to the A-Rod Teixeira team to eventually the Aaron Judge and Gary Sanchez team. That you needed to have a constant in there. And it's proven because Jacoby Ellsbury has not been on the field. And when he has been on the field, he is a shell of the player that he was expected to be. And here's a guy who throughout the entirety of his career has had one big season, and that was 2011. After that, he was hurt for half the season. After that, he was not the same player with the Boston Red Sox the year in 2013 when they won the World Series. So after that, he signs with the Yankees. He had a good year, but certainly not a year that was any close to what he did in 2011. And he's been average ever since when he's been healthy. And that can't come as a shock. There was no way anybody was expecting Jacoby Ellsbury to be Robinson Cano, and it was probably unfair to Jacoby Ellsbury. But I look at it, And I think if you look at what Brett Gardner has done over the last series of seasons, the last 5 or 6 seasons or so, and prior to that, 2010, 2011, of course, he was also, similar to Cano, part of the 2009 World Series championship team. He's giving you gritty at-bats. He's scoring 80, 90 runs a season. Like I said, for a guy that's so fast, can't steal a base in a big spot to save his life, but plays very good defense, pulls himself a couple home runs, and is an impactful member of the New York Yankees team. Something that Jacoby Ellsbury has not been able to be in spite of his 7-year, $153 million contract. So once again, to close this point and not to berate it anymore, if the Yankees are smart and they're deciding not to bring in another outfielder on the echelon, of course, of a Bryce Harper or somebody like that, you know, it would make a lot of sense for them to consider picking up Brett Gardner's option, who very quietly, and I know Yankee fans know him good, I know Yankee fans root for him, but on the national scene, nobody looks at Brett Gardner as a great player, but he's a very consistent player. And I think people in the national baseball community may not notice exactly how consistent Brett Gardner has been. Now, next thing I wanted to get into today. Once again, this is the Passball Show brought to you by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. Just a little bit of a recap. Stan Mikita, you know, NHL great, first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the greatest to ever lace up skates for the Chicago Blackhawks. Passed away at the age of 78. Very innovative player. Him and Bobby Hull with the curved stick. 1960-1961 Stanley Cup champions with the Chicago Blackhawks, which was their first Stanley Cup until 2009-2010. He passes away at the age of 78. Jerry Remy's cancer is coming back. Obviously wish him the best. A very long road ahead for him, and like I said, for anybody that unfortunately is diagnosed with cancer, it's something that, you know, when it's declared to be gone or declared to be cured, it's still living in your body. And it's unfortunate how it could come back and strike with vengeance at any time. And obviously that's when prayers come in, and you wish the best for one of the better guys in baseball in Jerry Remy. Michael Kay, you know, I'm not a Michael Kay fan, but I defend him in this instance. I think it was a simple slip in speech, you know, rather than saying, you know, it's a shame on them. He said shame on them, which obviously has a completely different meaning, talking about Clint Frazier and Jacoby Ellsbury not being in the New York Yankees lineup. You understand why Clint Frazier's mad. You understand why Jacoby Ellsbury, once he gets the news of what Kay said, would be mad. If you're Michael Kay and you're a stand-up guy that you claim to be, you have the discussion with him. You tell him it was a mistake. I believe it was a mistake, and you hope that the players forgive you. If they decide not to, what are you going to do? In some cases, you can't. In some cases, things that you say, even though you didn't mean them, have an impact on people, and you got to deal with the consequences. If you're the Yes Network, listen, if you're thinking about firing them over something like that, man, I tell you, I told you, I'm not a Michael Kay fan, but you want to hear me flip out over the overprotectiveness of political correctness and networks having no backbone? Try firing Michael Kay. You'll hear a wrath from me like you haven't heard before. You know, it'll make my rant about Beningo or my rant about Don Imus sound like they were kids' games. Last thing we talked about, or amongst the last things we talked about, Jacoby Ellsbury's contract. Not just talking about it being a bad contract, but talking about how, you know, he questioned a baseball team's decision to give a player this type of contract based off of his lack of track record. The fact that he had just one season in 2011 that stood out. One MVP type of season. One year where he played on a ridiculous level. In the next 2 years after that, I know one of them was hurt, but he didn't look like he was that player before or after. And then he signs this big contract. There was no way he was ever going to live up to it. And you look at a guy like Robinson Cano, they gave him a 10-year contract, and I said this years ago, the likeliness of a guy who has no health problems is almost like an Iron Man in his ability to go out there, go in there day in and day out, playing 150 games. at least an Iron Man in his generation, I would expect 7 good years out of Robinson Cano. And if you're looking to get 100% of a contract, it's very hard to do nowadays. You're certainly not getting 100% of Jacoby Ellsbury's 7-year contract. So if you signed Robinson Cano to a 10-year deal, I think the Yankees have another World Series championship by now. Maybe they don't go to the lengths of the rebuild that they did, a couple of years ago. But maybe they don't need to. The New York Yankees are about winning World Series championships. That's what their history says. That's what their fans expect. So it's just simply a bad move. Kevin Kiermaier, once again, I believe, is the most overrated player in all of Major League Baseball. And it's not really his fault. It's because of the emphasis that's put on defensive stats, the fact that wins above replacement and UZR and defensive runs saved and the ultimate zone rating and range factor, they're all compiled in wins above replacement, and we're trying to put a great defensive player on the same level as a great offensive player. And it's not fair, because I always say, pitchers and hitters, you're doing something completely different. Same thing for somebody that specializes in defense. You could quantify Ozzie Smith as being the greatest defensive player to ever play the game, but you can't necessarily say he was better than Honus Wagner, or he was better than Derek Jeter, or he was better than Rogers Hornsby, throwing in a guy that played a different position. Brooks Robinson was a great third baseman, but he was also a hell of a hitter. He was also an extremely underrated hitter. His defense was so good that you didn't even look at how great his offense was. So we're judging a player that is strictly a good defensive player and does little else. I can't put that player on the same platform or the same basis as a player that is hitting 50 home runs in a game that is so impactful and so based around the offense. And I certainly can't give that guy the most valuable player award unless he is hitting at a certain level. And it's not fair. And Kevin Kiermaier, as overrated as he is still probably one of the best defensive outfielders I've ever seen. And that's saying a lot. I've seen some pretty good ones. Andrew Jones was fantastic. Juan Lagares a couple years with the Mets. I know he's another guy that can't stay healthy, but the ground that these guys cover. Kevin Kiermaier is certainly up there, if not maybe better than that. He's probably the greatest defensive player of my era. Might be up there with Paul Blair. Might be up there with a Willie Mays. And it's hard to quantify the older player stats because the new age stats are judged with the eyesight and the eye test. That people that are computing these stats or have set these stats up are actually looking at the highlights and backing up what it is that they're seeing. You didn't get to do that with Willie Mays. Though you saw it in Paul Blair as he stood out, you didn't see it play by play with Paul Blair. So by no stretch of the imagination am I trying to take anything away from Kiermaier, but he's a below average offensive player. And a below average offensive player will never win a most valuable player award in Major League Baseball. Pretty similar to what I've said about the Rays. The Rays, the way that they run their franchise, and I know they're smart, I know they're innovative, I know they're always trying to gain any little advantage they can because they don't have the resources to do what the other teams are able to do. But I don't think they're ever going to get themselves to a World Series. And it's going to be very tough for them to do. They can come up with all these great ideas and use their pitchers a certain way. It's pretty hard to hang in a division that's got the Yankees and the Red Sox that are on a certain level. And Palma 313 says the Yankees on tonight, yes, game 2 today with the Chicago White Sox. Of course, the Yankees beat the White Sox 7-0 yesterday, ending their 5-game losing streak. I threw a joke out there. Obviously, it was tongue-in-cheek, saying, hey, the Yankees finally beat the Sox. But I tell you, if you're the Yankees right now, you just focus on playing the teams that you're playing. Don't worry about what happened in Boston. It was a massacre on a couple different levels. The fact that they had a lead in the first game against an average pitcher in Brian Johnson, ended up getting blown out. They run into Porcello, who pitched probably one of the best games all season that we've seen this year. Maybe one of the better games you've seen in Boston Red Sox history. I think it was that good. He was that dominant. He had the Yankees really feeding right out of his hand. Strike one every single time. And if you're the Yankees, what are you going to do? You're either going to swing and strike two or you're going to take strike two. And the Yankees had to decide whether they wanted to hit a pitch that may not have been drivable, but hit it because it's a strike and it's going to be strike two, or take strike two and be down in a count. Porcello was as dominant as anybody in baseball has been in an individual start this year. That's how good he was. That gets lost in the shuffle, and I spoke about that this morning. But I hope everybody enjoyed the show today. If you didn't listen to the first part of the show today, we spoke a little bit about Barry Bonds hitting number 756 on this day in 2007. A little bit about the Yankees, Red Sox, and Porcello, Adam Hamari, who is probably going to take Angel Hernandez's spot as being the worst umpire in all of Major League Baseball. And he's a part-time guy, so that's speaking volumes on how Adam Hamari has broken ground in Major League Baseball. But obviously, good day in the world of sports. Hope everybody enjoys what they hear and see tonight. Hopefully we'll be back with you tomorrow. This is the Pass Ball Show, brought to you by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. God bless you, and as always, I'll see you on the other side.